prego, vi imploro, con umiltà e con fiducia, permettete a Cristo di parlare all'uomo.
Don Gius aveva capito il problema che avevo. Se la tua vocazione è vero, il tuo lavoro verrà fuori anche dai sassi.
Di comunicare la fede agli altri, ma veramente insieme a loro riscoprire che cos'è la fede, che cos'è la fede per me. Portare Cristo agli altri, comunicarlo agli altri è l'unico modo che abbiamo per conoscerlo veramente.
L'iter communionis aiuta a comunicare all'esterno la ricchezza di vita, di giudizi, di tentativi, di opere che nascono dalle persone e dalle comunità. L'iter communionis è proprio la vita del movimento. Scrivete all'iter communionis le vostre esperienze, ci fate bene.
Vi prego, vi imploro, con umiltà e con fiducia, permettete a Cristo di parlare all'uomo.
Don Gius aveva capito il problema che avevo. Se la tua vocazione è vero, il tuo lavoro verrà fuori anche dai sassi.
Di comunicare la fede agli altri, ma veramente insieme a loro riscoprire che cos'è la fede, che cos'è la fede per me. Portare Cristo agli altri, comunicarlo agli altri è l'unico modo che abbiamo per conoscerlo veramente.
L'iter communionis aiuta a comunicare all'esterno la ricchezza di vita, di giudizi, di tentativi, di opere che nascono dalle persone e dalle comunità. L'iter communionis è proprio la vita del movimento. Scrivete all'iter communionis le vostre esperienze, ci fate bene.
Questo è un luogo che genera dialogo,
Qualcuno che si impegna, che si batte.
che approfondisce la conoscenza e sostiene la fiducia. È un crocevia dove si incontra chi desidera il vero, il bello, il giusto e il bene. È una testimonianza di speranza nel cuore ferito del presente. E tutto questo
Proporre con la propria vita.
esiste anche grazie a te.
Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome. It's great to be here all together to discover the nth little gold nugget that's been offered to us. I say gold because the logo of this meeting makes me think of bricks of a mosaic, but also of fragments of gold which could be hidden in daily life. In daily life that often seems so opaque, so heavy, so marked by an inexplicable evil, even in the historical time that we're in now. So a humanity that seems to have gone mad almost. But let's go on to what's good, to what we can share together this evening. The discovery of a book that already from its title makes us think how it is relevant for each one of us. Each of us has a face and is called to find their own and unrepeatable face that God thought of for them, a face in history. This is the book that we'll speak of this evening, and we'll be helped to understand it, to get deep into it, to get into this message which has been given to us. René Roux, the Dean of the Faculty of Theology in the University of Lugano, Margaret Karram, the President of the Focolare movement, and Davide Prosperi, the President of the Fraternity of Communion and Liberation. Who this evening is also in the role of curator of the book, so kind of a double role here. I'll be really quick because the time is precious. We've got a lot to say to each other, and so I'll go straight on to passing the word over to the rector of the Theology of Lugano, who will help us understand the value, also how precious it is, what Don Giussani has filtered and distilled from his experience in this historical period in which he lived and in which he wrote the lessons that are gathered together in this book. The church of the post-conciliar period that had suffered the tsunami of 1968, a church that was also listening to the cry, the need for authenticity, of truth that 1968 actually was in some ways. So, Professor, please. Thank you. Hope you can hear me. Yep. So, firstly, I'll thanks for having invited me here to this encounter to read Giussani. It's always an experience that's interesting to me. From one side, you breathe the greatness of extraordinary panoramas, and also there are many little questions. In particular, in my work as a theologian, looking at this series of 10 lessons which he gave in between 68, 69, 70 in the Peggy Centre. What did Giussani actually want to do? What was he trying to do? My impression was that we're dealing with a kind of introduction to Christianity, like Ratzinger wrote his book in 68 of that title, and another famous theologian, Karram, did one in 66. Giussani, in the face of the great crisis of 68, which he saw an exodus of many young people from GS and also others. Even the Catholic university students, Fucci, had the same problem, to not speak of many religious orders and priests who'd left their roles. Faced with this little group in the Peggy's Cultural Centre, he decided to turn back to the basis, the fundamentals, the essential. And so that, I think, is the meaning of these lessons. So the originality of it, I think I've seen a bit in the context of the problem of the evolution of theology in the 60s, in the 20th century in general, and in particular in that period. If anybody picks up a theology book of that period, and they'd see in 1962 the Summer of Holy Sacred Theology from a group of Spanish Jesuits. A very clear scientific Latin was used to write it. Definitions, consequences, citations from scripture, etc., and from tradition. If you look at that kind of handbook, that manual, which was used right up until the Council, and what was born straight afterwards, the Mysterium Salutis, which was written in Switzerland, the story of salvation, you realize that there was a kind of revolution happened. If we speak of a theology that was extremely well reasoned out, logical, according to what we might call a kind of Thomist or neo-Thomist model, to an effort to rethink it in a historical key. This change wanted to be a kind of response to some needs that in the 20th century were already being felt. It's not that so the things that changed in the manuals were also happening already. There were some problems, some issues, and the responses were not always simple. The first great thesis of Catholic theology of the 20th century was that of the relationship with the historical sciences, theology, historical critical exegesis of the New Testament and the Old Testament. These seemed to put in a crisis the foundations of faith itself, and at the same time a very analytical reading of the manualistic style of the traditional was missing a historical sense. So it seemed that the link was missing. So they wanted to recover a dimension of historical authenticity in the theology, the so-called nouvelle theologie, within the theological work. But the risk, when theologians and priests who've grown in an analytical method, with never having picked up the real technique of historical research, including its limits, there's the risk that they could fall into an absolutization of the results that they come out that would end up putting the basis of faith in crisis itself. This was a problem. Another problem was maybe the disconnect between the theological formulations and spiritual ones and concrete life. There too, there's the theoretical knowledge seemed not to have any impact on life, and so the looking for this contact sometimes happened in those years, really through the prevailing of a Marxist, a left-wing ideology that seemed to be able to better realize the bridge between ideals of justice and authenticity and concrete daily life, and that seemed to risk putting the experience of faith itself into a second place, or to transform it into a kind of interior moment of an interior well-being that wasn't able to say something into the world. And a third problem is that of the apostolicity, the need for the announcing the gospel transformed into a need for enculturalization, to speaking the language of those to whom we bring the gospel. And this risked that if it was done in an uncritical way, to pick up the categories that you were attributed to the recipient, without questioning whether those categories, from an anthropological point of view, were really adequate to accept the Christian message, and the risk, therefore, of losing it along the way. In front of these numerous needs and challenges, Giussani reacts, in fact, with his teaching of his, in which, in these 10 lessons, we have a testimony. This wasn't the whole of his activity, but it's very representative. If you let me, in my humble opinion, to describe a little bit of that kind of novelty that's in his teachings, that were very fertile from a certain point of view, spiritual, social points of view, and for the growth of the church. Firstly, he turns to the people he has in front of him. He turns to that group of young people who are called Guidi, who probably were, if you like, they're just a few losers, if you like. He wasn't thinking about how he could go and recover all of those who'd gone away, or some other mental category. No, how could he, with those people in front of me, they're important, same as everybody else. And if I don't start from these, maybe I won't arrive to anybody else. So this initial realism and form of humility, and also realism, I think this is really significant. Let's also note his. So this also questioned the attempts that were too abstract, or models of enculturation that imagined a human being, a perfect intellectual human, but who wasn't the concrete person you have in front of your eyes. The second point, I think that's really interesting, is returning to Christology, Christ our hope. This turning back to hope, this is certainly a genius aspect in what he was underlining in that time. So faith is an important thing, we know it, but thinking that truly Jesus is the Son of God who came, and there's the crib with the ox and the ass and so on. There's an aspect which asks for a step more, but the moment in which the totality of young people were looking for an ideal world, in a fantastic future. So this is what presenting Christ as hope became an authentic model to choose, that one could choose, that has the same level of credibility, if not even more, than that of the various political projects. So this choice of hope seems to me a very concrete response to that historical context. And it brings to mind that poem of Guidi, which Giussani liked a lot, and also that group from the centre, where Guidi speaks of faith and hope and charity as three sisters. The biggest important one are faith and charity, and hope is the little sister. But it's she who takes the other two by hand and draws them along. So all this was his way of reading the scriptures, and also the tradition of the church. And it's very specific, very unique. For him, the historical realism and authenticity of these things was central, but what he goes to look for in those was the authenticity of the religious sense and its depths. And this is the truth of those witnesses. And it's this that lets, the contemporaneousness with us of biblical texts of the prophets, the apostles, and Jesus, and all of those in tradition. So in this way, he managed to really use the historical sciences in a service of a knowing and a human experience, that he transmitted and witnessed to us the presence of the divine through this aspect of the religious sense. Faith conceived like this transforms into a criterion of judgment. Let's think what that really meant in that period, and maybe the problem isn't over, in a culture in Italy and elsewhere that for many years thought of Catholicism and the faith as something for children. But bit by bit, as you move up in school, then there's philosophy and maybe liberals, Marxists or whatever. You can choose these kind of philosophies. And here instead, Giussani has the courage to put back at the center faith as a criterion for judgment of things and of the world. And from here we also clearly see the task of the Christian is to build the church, and it's this that gives him his mission. This is what becomes his contribution. What strikes me most in this construction, and he repeats bits between the lessons, etc., what he was saying, the fact that in this vision of Christianity, there's a vision that is able to take within itself all aspects of experience, intellectual experience, of the concreteness of life. And in this way, he was able to recover also the importance of tradition, because the church becomes the place where I can make an experience of the historical presence of Christ in the community that he founded, in his mystical body, in his spiritual body, continues. And really, through this presence of Christ in the church, I can make an experience, a direct experience, and evaluate if this aspect is really true for me as well. And so from this point of view, I enter into this great communion. Giussani managed, in some ways, in this approach of his, to give an answer to those which were these problems of theology before the council. He wasn't ashamed of doing it for a group of young university students or young people. He could have spoken certainly to great theologians, but his affection, his friendship went first of all to the people who he had in front of him. And this concreteness of the life of the church was the same one as the incarnation that Jesus chose. So I think I'll stop here with these considerations of mine. And time is passing, so thank you. Margaret, Karram, will ask you something about a key word, if you like, of the Focolare, which is unity. Unity means living the dimension of community as something that's constitutive of yourself, not superfluous, not an optional extra, but something that founds your identity of the individual. In your experience, how does this aspect in relationships, how does that connect to the things that we're working on, that we're talking about today, this afternoon?
Good afternoon, everyone. I'd like to thank all of you, and I'm very honored and very happy to be here. I'd like to thank Davide first and foremost, who invited me, and it's the first time I'm here at the meeting. I remember when he called me, I was shocked, because I wasn't expecting him to invite me to take part, but I'm very happy to be here, and I've been able to get a taste for yesterday and today, all these different things here at the meeting, all the exhibitions. I'm particularly grateful for the friendship that binds us personally, but also as a community, as an ecclesiastic community. So to answer you kind of briefly, I'd like to recount one of the sections of the book that struck me the most, because it's of an incredible need for us. It's incredibly useful for the church and for us. He states that for every person, we heard this a bit just a second ago, for every person, the most important relationship is the one with God. And I quote, "The criterion for my choices is God. It is his work, the way he operates, his action. Christian communion is established in proportion to this initial conversation or conversion. To the extent that this spirit of communion exists, I collaborate in giving value to what you do, and thus the beneficial reverberation or impact on the world becomes increasingly powerful, and the church is built." I was struck by that. I collaborate by adding value to what you do, and that together we may build the church. It may seem pretty obvious to underline the timelessness of Father Giussani's message, but this was the first powerful impression that I continue to cherish after reading this volume. This is not a book to be read in one sitting. At least it certainly wasn't for me. From the first chapter, I felt that these words, which were written over 50 years ago, I felt that these words asked me to reflect and question myself. Father Giussani delivered these 11 lessons in a rather hot season, an era of cultural and ecclesial transformation. It's understandable how he felt deeply challenged as a Christian at the time by the context in which he lived. In a historical moment of strong ideological conflict, he was not afraid to challenge especially young people. Instead, he courageously showed them the path that the path that begins with God reaches every corner of the world and every situation in which humanity is immersed. Father Giussani's mission continues because he always spoke to the divine present in each one of us. This is a journey that never expires. The conversion to God that binds us into the Christian communion never goes out of style. Rather, it is our eternal present. The entire thematic journey that Father Giussani explored leads us to a new experience of a place that we likely need to rediscover the powerful evangelical prophecy. And this place is the community. To savour friendship with God and with our brothers and sisters. A community that is open to the world for its transformation in Christ. I, like you, Davide, was deeply struck, as you say in the first pages of the preface of the book. I was struck by by Giussani's constant reference to Scripture. And this is the main authentic reason for the timelessness of his thought. There is almost no page in this book in which he does not draw from this source of wisdom. From it, there continues to flow a freshness of his inspirations. The Word of God is the center that he was able to bestow or explain and rediscover in all that the Father created that was good and beautiful. The second reason for the kind of transition of energy from these lessons they still convey today is the gift of the Spirit that Giussani received, a charism that would benefit the ecclesial body and humanity. On page 39, we read, in fact, that for a Christian to fulfill his mission, he must have his face in the world. This is an expression that I loved, and Giussani explains what it means. One's face is that of the community they've lived in. It's the face of the living church. In fact, Christ, the hope of the world, is the foundation of Don Giussani's message. I couldn't help but notice the harmony with the ecclesial moment which we're experiencing, particularly this Jubilee year, in which we're all challenged to place Christ, our hope, back at the centre of our lives, and to step out of our limited worlds, to encounter one another, to experience communion in our communities and well beyond. And since we are Christians, Giussani writes, we are called to live the world, that is, to enter the deepest abysses of confusion, of loneliness, of pain, of war, and of terrible acts of violence. And we will bear greater fruit if we do so in communion. Living communion in the most authentic and universal sense that only the Church can represent. The many Jubilee events that the world has witnessed, even with amazement, such as the recent one involving the youth, are a powerful testimony of Christ today. A testimony of a church that attracts and makes God's presence manifest even today, even in these difficult times. You can imagine how much I was challenged by Giussani's the importance Giussani places on the community dimension for the Christian mission in the world. I was delighted to read some passages in which I also found great harmony between our charisms centered on the life of communion. And in one of those passages, Giussani says, Christian communion is the true subject of being within a situation, a neighborhood, a school, a university, a city, nation, or the world. The true Christian subject is the person who lives and carries with him and who builds the church there, wherever it is. This is the lived communion. This is Christian communion. As I was saying, I found great harmony, despite the diversity of our respective gifts, with the spirituality of the unity of Chiara Lubich, our founder. And if I may say also something personal, it was precisely the quality of the friendship between a group of young people and their testimony of living the words of the gospel that, when I was 14, touched me deeply and led me to embark on the path of the Focolare. Chiara Lubich spoke often of communion, sharing her passion for it with thousands of people. In 1989, she defined her expression of communion as the sacrament of the laity. She said, I have the impression that Jesus in this age, through us lay people, wants to emerge from the tabernacles, wants to go out into the world, wants to live among us. Indeed, this Jesus in our midst, in my opinion, is the sacrament of the laity. If we don't enter into society, into humanity, we'd remain a movement that is too spiritualistic, which is not what God wants, because Jesus he incarnated, he became man. But the confirmation that life in communion is central to the church and to the many situations humanity experiences, it certainly doesn't end here. Rather, another important example I experienced was the Synod on Synodality, which I attended. I would call it a gym or a training ground for communion. Certainly not an easy one, but it remains a journey to be learned and practiced, because to live it requires time, a deep listening, and a sense of culture, and of continuous conversion of the heart to see others and to see their true nature, that of children of God. But I'm certain that the experience that we lived endures. It's a seed that's been sown throughout the church, at all levels, and in time it will bear fruit. And I cannot help but recall the extraordinary words that Pope Leo addressed to CL on last July the 21st in his handwritten letter on the occasion of the exercises of the Memoris Domini. He said, "I urge you to forge fraternal relationships and to build bridges, and to dialogue openly and frankly within your association, to walk together, to build agreement between yourselves and the Church. This is necessary so that charism inspired by God through Father Giussani may continue to bear fruits for good, and help especially the new generations to encounter the Lord and become a prophetic sign of his beauty." This is a very important confirmation for the CL community, but also for the Focolare movement and for all ecclesial realities, in which the Pope encourages us to recognize the evangelical value and for human and social transformation that our charism has, and also to open spaces of mutual exchange and enrichment on cultural, spiritual, and experience levels. I'll conclude with one final reflection. Speaking of community and community and ecclesial dimensions in a world that's increasingly characterized by individualism, by solitude, atheism, secularism, but also a world marked by violence, may seem truly absurd. However, Father Giussani's message resonates more strongly than ever, because it invites us not to give in to the easy path of resignation, to not abandon ourselves to despair or to close ourselves within our comfort zone. It invites us to experience salvation that springs from friendship with Jesus, from unshakable faith in his death and resurrection. And this binds us onto ecclesial life, inviting us into a deeper and truer communion with everyone. Only in this way will we not let ourselves be discouraged, but rather we will have the courage to continue patiently there where everything seems to be crumbling, to weave threads of peace and dialogue. Patience is a virtue that Giussani defines as the fundamental characteristic of the Christian's attitude in history, the energy that creates and lives history. Don Giussani invites us today to live our historical present with this same energy, and he calls us to come together even more in communion to build the church, to make it overflow into the world, allowing ourselves to be inspired and surprised by the Spirit's imagination. Thank you.
Grazie.
Thank you for sharing this with us. This book is truly full of hope and of an urgency to transmit that hope. It's an even more significant element because the author in those periods, in that time, Don Giussani had just traveled through a period of like a desert in that time in his life. He'd struggled. But from that time of struggle, there would be born new bricks that were unforeseen, that were previously impossible to imagine. Every page is full of this passion for education, this strong desire to transmit his experience, all the while maintaining high this Christian pretense, as Giussani says, which is a response to all the questions of man these days, not only the religious portion of it, but to the entirety of self. And the editor of the book anticipated this in the preface, and it really is a theme that's worth deepening, because it's something that, we often sort of compartmentalize our lives. There's the work part, the religious part, the fun part, but Giussani has always taught to understand ourselves as one whole being with a whole desire that desires a response that's also more widespread.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. And I thank the meeting for this invitation, for the possibility to be here with so many of you, to have had so many encounters, and to be able to encounter Don Giussani once again. So I particularly thank Margaret and René, because already firstly for their presence, for accepting this invitation, but also I must say for the words that we've heard, because amongst others, in a large part, they've said what I'm going to say in some ways, and this kind of identifies a bit the aim for which we have a fraternity of communal liberation, which it developed all this work in the most recent years of recovering some of Don Giussani's texts that were previously unpublished. I think last year there came out the first volume of these same kind of texts from the same years in the Piggy Centre. It was called A Revolution of Self. And this year, A Face in History, again published by Rizzoli. And these are texts through which Don Giussani continues to offer us in a fascinating, attractive way. I can use this word, I think, because the testimony itself that we've heard today from our friends shows us how there aren't internal texts. They are texts that are a contribution to the church, to the whole world. And so he continues to offer us his testimony of faith. And from this point of view, I think that they have a great, and particularly this last one, has a great value. And that is, in a time that is so, in some ways, important, that was such a delicate change for the life, for the charisms, for the laity, for associations and movements in the church, that in many of which we have, after the death of the founders, we have sort of inevitably a period of deepening, of reflection on the nature of the charism itself, and that was given to the church through these individuals. And the reality for the movement, the human reality in the movement is born from it. testifies the continuity of this. So, what is the great value? It's that of offering to the reader, in a very clear way, I would say, the incandescent nucleus, I'll say, of the charism of Giussani. So, indeed, in a period like we've heard, that was very remarkable for the life of our country, but also elsewhere, and for the church, and that attracted many people to Christ and impassioned them for the church. I was really struck by the surprising relevance of his proposal today, its pertinence, because here he points out those reductions which distance the Christian announcement from the real life of people, from their problems, from their interests. So, to respond to the question, I'd like to concentrate on what Giussani points out as the central point, in his words, of all of the Christian discourse, which it could be summed up in this affirmation. He says, Christ is our hope. But he adds, the difficulty is to comprehend the radicality of this. Giussani goes on, indeed, it's an affirmation that places itself as the bearer of a global significance for my life, for myself, for the existence, for history and for the world. In other words, it has a global significance that doesn't leave anything out. So Christ is our hope, not only for this or that aspect of life, for the purity of your spirit, or for the thinking of death, but for all of our existence. When we pray, when we work, when we build relationships, when we face the problems of society and politics, all of this comes within the horizon of the interests of a Christian. And so the affirmation, our hope, as Margaret also said, it's not at all obvious. It's not to be taken for granted, not even for the Christians themselves. Its importance. Sorry, there's mic trouble. This comes about either because it's placed solely in the hereafter, a hereafter that's outside of concrete life, what could be experienced by each one of us, or because it's confined into a psychological introspection. It seems then like a hope that's got nothing to do with life, nothing to do with society, with the world, with its needs, with its urgencies and contradictions in front of which we're placed every day. We're talking about a way to propose Christianity that's unfortunately very widespread today. This is the point that Giussani helps us to understand, and that I personally think is decisive for our human adventure. And again, using his words, there's a spiritualistic conception and an emotional, intellectual of the Christian fact. This conception empties itself, it disincarnates it. It throws it out of reality, separating it from life and from its needs, and makes hope an abstract fleeing from things. And so it's no surprise if Christianity, that's reduced to sentiment, doesn't have any grasp, any strong grip that's decisive on young people. So in this context, that's where we find Giussani's proposal. He often would repeat even in friendly contexts, but we also know publicly that the ideal for a Christian is to be mixed up with Christ. What does this mean? It means that when God looks at man, what does he see? This is the question which we all face. Yeah? But when God looks at man, what he sees is Christ. Christ is man, or a fully human looking at things, a company for man. Not only a theological discourse, a theory, a morality, a companion for man. And this way of looking shows a judgment that is no longer just a law, as it was from the beginning in the story of salvation until that moment, but a presence that walked in the roads of Palestine, who was affectionate, who got moved by things, who explained everything, who did extraordinary things, miracles. So in his book, Jesus of Nazareth, Benedict XVI makes this analogy, pointing to Jesus as the new prophet. He is no longer the new, not just the new David, but he says he's above all the new Moses. The prophets, in fact, are those who make us enter into the gaze of God upon man, on the world. And to be able to know this gaze, this way of looking, it's for this that we move, and to know this way of looking is hope. This gives us hope in front of all our tribulations, in front of the things we don't understand, injustices that we submit or that we commit. Moses is the only of the prophets who actually saw God. And so he speaks of what he saw of God. Jesus is the one who comes to share not only what is seen, but the relationship that he lives with the Father. Day by day, his presence becomes a chance to know, a chance to comprehend, to enter into the mystery of the relationship that he lives with the Father. Jesus not only has seen God, he sees God, and he sees him in himself in a unity that's living. So you understand that the most desirable thing from that moment on is to enter into that unity, to be part of it, that communion, that deep communion between Christ and the Father. Giussani observes, underlining, drawing out this face in history and making it ever closer to us. Look, please, that Christ as hope, total hope, this Christ is a historical event. So, as René said, he has a date. He's born from a woman and is made of flesh, so much so that they killed him, they offed him. This man is everything. He was he's the key, the axis of history in the cosmos. In what way is this radical observation? This is scandalous. Scandalous for the common mentality of his time and indeed of our time. How are they valid for my existence 2,000 years later? This is really important, the answer. If Christ is the factor of our experience, and therefore he has to be here. He must be here, must be within the present. Otherwise, the factor of hope would be my or your interpretation of his life and of his words. We'd be sent back to to our finiteness and therefore of our powerlessness. Instead, Jesus Christ, who is born, who died, and who is historically did rise, is risen in a specific time. He's present now. Now, within our historical present, within our existence. Our sight again. Without any interpretation interposing itself, he's objectively present with a face that's physically precise, a face in history, like yours, which I see in front of me. And this is his mystical body, the church. So this is the totality of the Christian announcement, as Giussani presents it to us. A presence made of flesh and of the bones of those who were grasped by him and who knew him and who accepted him. So the encounter with Christ happens today exactly through the flesh, the faces and the voices of his witnesses. A human company that's full of attraction, full of promise, of proposal. Certainly, this brings risks along with it. It's human. People we know individually are full of limits, of errors. Look at ourselves. But it's possible to accept. It's, in fact, just to accept all the way to run these risks, because without this path, the face of God, and therefore the voice of God, would once again become really far away from us. Purely an insoundable mystery, an unfathomable mystery. Saying Christian company, Christian community, a church, is to say the way in which Christ, the risen Christ, chose to remain concretely present within history, to make us know the Father. I realize that many times we don't look at our company like this. And so we don't have the Christian community against us with respect, affection, attachment, which comes from the recognition that Christ is objectively present. And so Giussani insists in the book on the fact that Christ, our hope, says it means that the church is our hope, because the church is the extending itself in history of Christ, that the church will receive its full and universal complement, as St. Paul says. This is the point. Only a real presence here and now changes life in all its aspects. And so, personal ones, social, and is the fount of hope, the foundation of hope. Christ entering the world continues his presence in the mystery of the church and places itself like a principle of disturbance of the human condition. And those who knew Giussani must recognize that certainly in this aspect, he found himself mixed up with Christ, as you say. Disturbance of the human condition. Why would it be worthwhile otherwise to be Christians? We're like everyone else. But this also sets our task in the world to build the church. We've already heard this. Building the church because, as Giussani says, in doing this, we have a hope to contribute to create that disturbance of the human things which mobilizes their movement towards an improvement. Not to be annoying, but to go towards a more true, more just way of living. So the construction of the church starts within the relationship with the people who are placed next to you, really because they're touched, like us, by the same announcement, living that new way, that more human way for relationships that Christ has introduced in history. And therefore, this is something that we are called, not as something we gain, we own, but as a becoming, as a continuous conversion. Giussani says the Christian communion is nothing other than the bit of the world in which the relationships and structures are modified by the faith in Christ. And this conversion, if it communicates itself to the world around, like by contagion, even when you're in seemingly impossible situations of powerlessness, I think often in these times, but each of you can imagine, about the little Christian community of the parish of Gaza. We know what's happening in even these very hours. It's so dramatic. The Christians present there, but all persecuted Christians in the world, their presence, their very presence, is a testimony to another possible way of behaving, of relating among people. It's a small seed that works in time, mysteriously, brings and will bring ever more fruit. And today, the additional communique from Cardinal Pizzaballa, together with the Orthodox Patriarchate, that the priests and religious who are present there in Gaza have decided to not abandon Gaza. They've decided to remain there. Yes, it's right. It's right that we applaud. But they don't do it. They're not doing it. I say, regardless of how things finish, I see a similarity for those who've seen it with the exhibition of the martyrs of Algeria. It's born like this. It's born like this because martyrdom is not sought out, but as we saw even heard in the encounter with Cardinal Vesco, it's to be close, to remain close to the faithful that they're there, to let them feel the warmth of their company, because we are a single body. And it's through this that the whole people, even those who aren't Christians, because we look at everybody as sons and daughters of He from whom we depend. And that is us here and now. We're happy to take part in this people, to be part of this people. And so I want to quote Cardinal Pizzaballa when he says that the Church, he refers to the presence of the Christian community as a unique point of truth, of light, within this situation for which the whole world, in terms of logic and power of compromises, the world needs this. The world needs a real presence. And Giussani observed that the Church is really the place for those who take part in the faith and the judgment of Christ, and therefore tend over time to the expression of this judgment. And what is what expression is there that's greater than offering your own life for affirming Christ? Christ as the response to the needs of man. So I'll come back to the starting point. Christ, living Christ. This Christ who can be met today is the judgment of God on the world. What are the consequences of this? That the Christian community lived out becomes the subject of a new way of living in all places, not just extreme environments, but your home, university, school, workplaces, your neighborhood, etc. But first of all, as sharing the needs of all of the human reality which you meet in the places of daily life. And so as a tireless attempt to respond to them at all levels. Certainly, we've seen how our friends are living there, but also within culture. The meeting is an example of this attempt at the level of society, through politics, through initiatives, works of charity, of education, acts of being present, like the meeting. But if we like to share as Christians all of human reality, it's full of need, we must be watchful about who we are. Who we are and for what reason do we move. It's not enough to think of being better, being nicer, more good. But the true Christian subject, Giussani says, is the man who lives and brings with him and creates, constructs the church there where he is. This is the Christian communion. So I'll finish up. This means that we're not authentically within the university, within the workplace, within the environments, and therefore useful to the world, if we don't bring with us and express that new reality which generates us. If we don't bring there where we are our communion, where Christ is present. This is our task, Giussani says. Every other belonging isn't ours. Every other start point is not ours. The Christian personality is defined by the term mission. And so all the significance of our life, and here I'll finish, is in being ourselves mission. In bringing Christ, bringing the Christian hope, the hope that is the church, through our free belonging to it itself. I think that this freedom that is a personal freedom, that every instant saying yes to Christ is the gladness that and the gladness that comes from this. These are the signs of that radicality for which Don Giussani could really bring to the world, at least as an announcement, the hope and the peace that we all search for. Thank you. Being watchful of who we are. This brought back to mind one of the many phrases of the book, the classic Giussani phrases that you keep on your desk when you're working to not lose it. He says, with his classical briefness and frankness that maybe comes from his Brianza background, if you move far away from the reality of Christ, you risk to slip into ideology, which judges without freeing, a judgment without love, without true realism, that doesn't free anybody. Another phrase that to me seemed prophetic, as he quoted Niebuhr, he says that the true Christian experience that's lived creates a citadel of hope constructed on the fringe of desperation. So even where the world tries to suffocate this spark of hope, of good. A few others, I want you to buy the book, which is full of pearls like this. The novelty that we're called to bring is something that has been given to us, is there a more radical poverty than this? So, if there was time, it would be lovely to do another round of the table like this, but we don't have this time. But I'll ask each of you if you'd like to hand over to the meeting people a very brief comment. Not all of you, because there's no time, but who'd like to go now? I want just to add, because it's linked to the question which you did at the beginning, that between Karram and Giussani, they were linked by a friendship that was deep, a deep friendship. Not only because they met each other many times, but there was a unity of soul, of spirit between them. Each one was given a charism by God that they were able to make fruitful in their lives and transmit it to many people, to be able to announce Jesus, to be able to announce his kingdom and work for his kingdom in the world, bring love. It's a particular moment for them was the Pentecost in 98 in St. Peter's Square, which really marked an important stage in this communion among all the movements and new communities. Some of you yesterday were saying it wasn't an arrival point, but a departure point. I hope that this communion, this unity among all our ecclesial realities can be really a starting moment, because that moment, Pope John Paul II, he'd said that the Church expects from you mature fruits. I think this is now the moment when we can together really give these mature fruits for the Church and also for humanity. And Giussani, after this experience, he said that he'd made a really deep, profound experience that he'd never had in his life of unity, even among these founders. And he said, how can we not cry out this unity? And so I feel that we have this task, this inheritance that we've received from us of the second, third generations, to be able to cry out our unity today. This is my wish. Thank you. In 41 seconds, 39, a little invitation. Go to page 80 of the book. The definition of prayer, which Giussani gives, and the definition of friendship, which is there. It develops elsewhere, but there it's written down in a really clear, brief way. And I think that these two definitions, you find the root of the spiritual fruitfulness of this message and of everything that came after, including this meeting. Thank you.
Grazie.
Thank you. Thank you, speakers. Thank you to each of you who's here with us this evening, because each one of us is a little brick in this great mosaic. And so I'll conclude, and I'll greet you with a beautiful phrase of Pope Leo, who's also my current employer. We cannot allow ourselves anymore to resist the kingdom of God that's drawn from the message. There's no time left to do that. We've wasted too much time. So thank you. Thank you for your attention. Thank you for your presence.
Questo è un luogo che genera dialogo,
Qualcuno che si impegna, che si batte.
che approfondisce la conoscenza e sostiene la fiducia. È un crocevia dove si incontra chi desidera il vero, il bello, il giusto e il bene. È una testimonianza di speranza nel cuore ferito del presente. E tutto questo
Proporre con la propria vita.
esiste anche grazie a te.
Vi prego, vi imploro, con umiltà e con fiducia, permettete a Cristo di parlare all'uomo.
Don Giussani aveva capito il problema che avevo. Se la tua vocazione è vero, il tuo lavoro verrà fuori anche dai sassi.
Di comunicare la fede agli altri, ma veramente insieme a loro riscoprire che cos'è la fede, che cos'è la fede per me. Portare Cristo agli altri, comunicarlo agli altri è l'unico modo che abbiamo per conoscerlo veramente.
L'ittere communionis aiuta a comunicare all'esterno la ricchezza di vita, di giudizi, di tentativi, di opere che nascono dalle persone e dalle comunità. L'ittere communionis è proprio la vita del movimento. Scrivete all'ittere communionis le vostre esperienze, ci fate bene.
Vi prego, vi imploro, con umiltà e con fiducia, permettete a Cristo di parlare all'uomo.
Don Giussani aveva capito il problema che avevo. Se la tua vocazione è vero, il tuo lavoro verrà fuori anche dai sassi.
Di comunicare la fede agli altri, ma veramente insieme a loro riscoprire che cos'è la fede, che cos'è la fede per me. Portare Cristo agli altri, comunicarlo agli altri è l'unico modo che abbiamo per conoscerlo veramente.
L'ittere communionis aiuta a comunicare all'esterno la ricchezza di vita, di giudizi, di tentativi, di opere che nascono dalle persone e dalle comunità. L'ittere communionis è proprio la vita del movimento. Scrivete all'ittere communionis le vostre esperienze, ci fate bene.